The Apache woman froze. She had heard stories of such raids, strangers who came with fire and steel, taking what they wanted without care for life. Her heart pounded in her chest. She had always known the risks of living on the frontier, but she had never faced them so close, so real. The village erupted in panic. People ran to gather their belongings, some shouting warnings, others grabbing weapons. The Apache woman turned to run back toward her home, hoping to protect her family, but it was too late. The raiders descended like a storm, their horses thundering across the open land. Great chaos spread like wildfire. Screams filled the air, mingling with the sound of horses' hooves and the clash of metal. The young woman fought to remain calm. She grabbed a small knife from her belt, not knowing if it would be enough, but determined to defend herself if necessary. One of the raiders spotted her and lunged. She twisted just in time, narrowly avoiding his grasp. She ran through the narrow paths between the huts, her mind racing. She needed to survive. She needed to escape, but there was nowhere to run. Every direction seemed blocked by armed men. She found herself surrounded, her options shrinking with every passing second. Fear clawed at her chest, yet she refused to give in. Then, as if by fate, she saw him. A man riding a horse appeared over the hill, moving with purpose and speed. His presence was commanding, and there was something about the way he approached that made the raiders hesitate. The young woman could not read his intentions at first. Was he coming to help, or was he another threat? Her instincts told her to flee, but she stayed, hidden behind a rock, watching. The man faced the raiders without fear. His horse reared slightly, and he raised his hand as if challenging them. Then, with skill and precision, he fought. He moved like someone who had spent a lifetime mastering his craft, disarming the attackers, protecting the vulnerable. The raiders, realizing they had underestimated him, began to retreat, some fleeing, others falling back. The young woman's heart leapt with hope, though she remained cautious. She had seen many times that help could arrive too late. Finally, the raiders were gone. Scattered across the hills, the village lay in ruins, some huts damaged, smoke rising from small fires. The young woman stepped cautiously from her hiding place. The man was nearby now, dismounting his horse with ease. He approached her slowly, hands visible, showing he meant no harm. His face was weathered by the sun and wind, but his eyes were steady and calm. Best cavehead. He gave her a small nod, a silent assurance that she was safe, for now. Her emotions were a mixture of relief and wariness. She wanted to trust him, but the world had taught her that appearances could be deceiving. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly.
"I'm a friend," he replied simply, his voice low but firm. "You're safe now, but we need to move."
More could come. She hesitated, glancing back at the village, at the smoke in the ruins, at the possibility of family still in danger. Then she nodded. She had no choice. She followed him, keeping her distance, her senses alert. They moved quickly through the hills, avoiding open paths and following trails known only to those familiar with the land. The young woman began to notice small details about the man, the careful way he scanned their surroundings, the way he guided her without forcing her, the quiet confidence that radiated from him. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were clear and purposeful. Hours passed as they traveled. The sun climbed higher, then began its descent, casting long shadows across the desert. The young woman's fear began to transform into something else: curiosity, cautious admiration, and the faintest hint of trust. She saw how he treated the animals with care, how he looked at the land with respect, and how he never once forced her to do anything she did not want. Despite the danger, there were moments of quiet between them. At one point, he pointed out a safe path across a rocky stream, helping her step carefully from stone to stone. She realized that while the world had been cruel, there were still people who could act with honor. She could feel her heart beating not just with fear, but with the awareness that she was no longer alone in facing this crisis. As night fell, they reached a small sheltered area under a cliff, a place where they could rest without being easily seen. The cowboy started a small fire, enough for warmth and light, but not enough to attract attention. The young woman sat nearby, her knees drawn to her chest, watching the flames. She felt exhausted, her body aching from the day's events, but she also felt a strange sense of safety she had not felt since the attack began. But the cowboy glanced at her, noticing her tense posture. "You're safe here tonight," he said quietly.
I'll stay with you. No one will harm you.
She nodded, not trusting her voice to speak. She had expected death, expected pain, expected betrayal, but not this. Not someone who would risk so much to save her. She realized that her life had changed in a single day. The world she had known, simple and familiar as it was, had been shattered. Yet in that destruction there was also the beginning of something new, something she could not yet name. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the occasional distant cry of a coyote. The young woman's mind wandered, thinking of her family, her village, and the life she had known. Breath. Could she ever return to it? Could she ever feel safe again? She did not know. But she understood one thing clearly. The cowboy who had saved her was now part of her life, and she would need to trust him if she hoped to survive what lay ahead. As she drifted into a restless sleep under the stars, she realized that fear was still there, but so was hope. She did not yet know what tomorrow would bring, but she had survived. And in surviving, she had found an unexpected ally, a man whose courage had given her a chance to live, and perhaps, in time, to heal. The desert night was quiet, but it was full of possibilities. But the young woman, captured and expecting death, had been spared. She had been given a new path, one that would challenge her, test her, and ultimately change her life forever. And as the fire dimmed and the stars sparkled above, she slept with the faintest glimmer of hope in her heart, a hope that, for the first time in a long while, felt real. The next morning, the young woman awoke to the soft light of dawn spilling over the desert hills. The air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and dry earth. She sat quietly, brushing the dust from her clothes, her mind restless. The events of the previous day seemed almost unreal. The attack, the chaos, and the cowboy who had saved her. She could hardly believe that she had survived, let alone that she now traveled with a man she barely knew but could not ignore. The cowboy was already awake, sitting on a rock nearby and tending to his horse. He glanced at her and nodded, a silent greeting that spoke of calm and steadiness. She returned a hesitant nod, still unsure of what to say. Words seemed inadequate after the fear and adrenaline of the day before. Instead, she chose to observe him quietly, noticing how carefully he moved, how he respected the land and the animals around him, and how he never once tried to intimidate her. They set off at first light, moving through narrow trails hidden between rocky outcrops. The cowboy led the way, scanning the horizon constantly, his hand resting on the strap of his rifle. She followed closely, feeling a strange mix of fear and relief. Every crack of a branch, every distant cry of an animal made her heart race, yet the presence of the man beside her gave her a sense of security she had not felt in hours, or perhaps days. As they traveled, the young woman began to notice the small details of the cowboy's character. He spoke little, choosing his words carefully, but when he did, it was to give instructions or offer reassurance. He moved with purpose, yet there was gentleness in his actions. How he helped her across uneven terrain, how he encouraged the horse without shouting, and how he treated the few supplies they carried with care. She realized that courage was not just about fighting. It was about responsibility, about protecting those who could not protect themselves. Hours passed, and the desert heat began to rise. They paused near a shallow stream, the water clear and cold. The young woman knelt to drink, grateful for the brief respite. She felt the burn of exhaustion in her muscles and the ache of sore feet, but also a quiet determination. She had survived the attack, and she would continue to survive. She glanced at the cowboy, who watched her with a careful eye. For the first time she spoke, her voice hesitant but steady. "Why did you help me?" she asked. The cowboy looked away, toward the distant hills, before answering. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said simply. "No one deserves to be harmed for no reason." She considered his words, the simplicity of them, and the honesty she sensed beneath them. In her world, many people acted out of fear, greed, or power. This man had acted out of principle. It was confusing, almost unfamiliar, but it also sparked a small sense of trust she could not ignore. They moved again, traveling through the midday heat. The young woman found herself thinking of her family, of the people left behind in the village, and of the life that had been abruptly taken from her. She wondered if they had survived, if they had found shelter, if they were safe. The cowboy did not press her to speak, but his presence seemed to offer silent comfort. Sometimes words were not necessary. As the sun climbed higher, they reached a narrow canyon, a place where the heat reflected off the rocks and the path became treacherous. The cowboy led her carefully, pointing out unstable stones and sharp edges. She followed, her trust in him growing with every careful step. The journey was dangerous, but she began to feel a strange sense of hope. If she could survive this, perhaps she could survive anything. That evening, they found a sheltered area beneath a cluster of boulders. The cowboy quickly set up a small fire, enough for warmth and light, but small enough to avoid attracting attention. The young woman sat nearby, watching him move with efficiency and care. She felt the weight of the day pressing on her, the fatigue of constant vigilance. Yet there was also a quiet gratitude. He had saved her life, and now he shared this small, temporary safety with her. As darkness fell, the young woman thought about her life before the attack. She remembered the laughter of her siblings, the warmth of her mother's voice, the stories told around the evening fire. Those memories were bittersweet now, a reminder of what she had lost, but also of what she carried within her. She realized that her strength was not just in surviving, but in remembering, in holding on to the life that had shaped her. The cowboy watched her silently for a moment, then spoke in a low voice. "We should rest. Tomorrow will be another long day. The world beyond these hills is not safe, but we will find a place where you can recover." She nodded, appreciating his concern. For the first time since the attack, she felt a measure of relief. The journey ahead would not be easy, but she was not alone. And in that thought, a small spark of courage began to grow within her. The night passed quietly, with only the sound of the wind and the occasional distant howl of a coyote. She slept lightly, her mind half in dreams and half in thought. When she woke, the sun had risen over the canyon walls, painting them in shades of gold and red. The cowboy was already up, tending to the horse and checking the supplies. She stretched, feeling the stiffness in her limbs, and prepared herself for another day of travel. The journey continued through rough terrain, across dry riverbeds and over rocky hills. They encountered small obstacles along the way, a fallen tree blocking a narrow path, a swarm of insects near a water source, and the constant threat of hostile strangers. Each time the cowboy handled the situation calmly and efficiently, teaching her how to navigate dangers without panic. She began to rely on his experience, learning from his movements, his decisions, and his silent judgment. During one particularly difficult stretch, the young woman slipped on loose gravel and injured her ankle. Pain shot through her leg, and she sank to the ground, fearing they would have to stop or turn back. The cowboy knelt beside her immediately, examining the injury with care. He tied a simple bandage, checking for swelling and ensuring she could still walk. She felt a wave of gratitude mixed with embarrassment. She had always been independent, but now she realized that accepting help was not a weakness. It was survival. As they rested for a short while, she watched the cowboy move around, setting up a temporary shelter and gathering small sticks for the fire. She noticed the way he treated the land with respect, never breaking more than necessary, never harming the animals unnecessarily. There was a quiet wisdom in his actions, a deep understanding of the balance between survival and care. She began to see him not just as a protector, but as a man of principle and strength. The days passed in a blur of travel, challenges, and quiet moments. The young woman grew stronger, more aware of her surroundings, and more attuned to the cowboy's guidance. She began to speak more, asking questions about the land, about survival, and about his life. He answered patiently, sharing stories of his own experiences without boasting, teaching her not just to survive, but to navigate the world with caution and respect.
One evening they reached a small grove with a clear stream and a few trees for shelter.
The young woman paused, letting the water cool her hands and face. She felt a sense of peace she had not known since the attack on her village. The cowboy approached, setting down his pack and sitting beside her. For a moment they watched the water flow in silence, the only sound the gentle rush over the stones. "Thank you," she said quietly. He looked at her, surprised by the words. "For what?" he asked. "For saving me," she replied. "Grasp, for not letting me die when I thought I would." He nodded, his expression serious. "You'll have strength," he said.
You survived far more than you realize. I only helped you see it.
She considered his words, feeling a mix of pride and humility. She had feared death, had expected it at the hands of strangers, yet here she was, alive and moving forward. She realized that her journey was not just about escape. It was about learning to trust again, about discovering courage she had not known she possessed. That night, as they sat by the fire, she thought about the days to come. The journey was far from over, and the world beyond the hills remained dangerous. But she also knew that she was no longer alone. The cowboy, the man who had appeared like a guardian in the midst of chaos, had become her companion, her guide, and her protector.
And though she could not yet name it, a bond was forming between them, one built on trust, respect, and shared struggle.
She closed her eyes, listening to the crackle of the fire and the whisper of the wind. Fear still lingered at the edges of her thoughts, but so did hope. Breaths. She had survived the first test, and with each step forward, she would continue to grow stronger. The journey was only beginning, but she was ready to face it, because she was no longer facing it alone. As the stars appeared overhead, glittering in the clear night sky, she allowed herself a small, quiet thought. Perhaps life could still hold kindness even after so much fear. Perhaps trust could grow even in the most unlikely places. And perhaps, just perhaps, she could find a new path forward, one step at a time, with the man who had saved her walking beside her. The days that followed were both challenging and revealing. The young woman and the cowboy continued their journey through the rugged wilderness, moving cautiously through narrow valleys and rocky ridges. The desert sun beat down on them during the day while the nights grew cold and sharp, forcing them to huddle together for warmth under the vast, star-filled sky. Each day tested her endurance, her courage, and her ability to rely on someone else. Yet, she found herself learning, growing, and slowly letting go of some of the fear that had gripped her since the attack on her village. On one particular morning, they emerged from a dense thicket into a wide open plain. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of distant wildflowers and dry grass. For a moment, the young woman allowed herself to relax, breathing deeply and letting the tension in her shoulders ease. But the cowboy remained vigilant, scanning the horizon with sharp eyes. "They could still be out there," he said quietly, almost to himself. "We can't assume we're safe yet." She nodded, understanding the truth in his words. Danger could appear at any moment, and they had no choice but to remain alert. Still, there was something reassuring in his presence. Breath. No matter how vast the plains or how uncertain the path ahead, she knew that he was watching, ready to act if anything threatened her. As they continued, the young woman found herself observing him more closely. He moved with careful precision, yet there was an ease to his steps, as if he was part of the land itself. He checked the horse's footing before crossing streams, paused to avoid unstable rocks, and even took time to notice the small signs of life around them. The tracks of animals, the movement of birds, and the subtle changes in the wind. But she realized that his strength was not just physical. It was patience, awareness, and respect for the world around him. Her thoughts were interrupted when a sudden sound echoed across the plain. A shout, sharp and commanding, carried on the wind. Both of them froze, their senses immediately on high alert. The cowboy's hand went to his rifle, and the young woman crouched low behind a boulder, her heart racing. From the distance, she saw figures moving swiftly across the open land, coming closer with determination. Raiders! Fear surged through her, stronger than ever. But she had faced them once, and now they were back, threatening to end her life again. But this time, she did not feel entirely helpless. She had seen the cowboy fight, and she had learned to observe, to anticipate, to prepare. She followed his movements instinctively, crouching low, keeping her eyes on the approaching danger and holding her breath. The cowboy called out a warning to them in a low, commanding voice. "Stay down. Don't move until I tell you." The raiders stopped, momentarily confused by the presence of someone defending the plain. The cowboy moved quickly and decisively, positioning himself so that he could confront them while keeping the young woman safe behind cover. He did not strike out with anger. He struck with precision, skill, and a clear strategy. One by one, the attackers realized that they had underestimated him. They faltered, retreated, and eventually turned back, leaving the pair unharmed. When the last of them disappeared into the distance, the young woman exhaled, her knees weak with relief and fear. She had expected death, yet here she was, alive because of the man beside her. For the first time, she felt a deep, profound gratitude that went beyond mere thanks. She had trusted him to save her life, and he had. The cowboy approached her carefully, his expression calm but serious. "You need to rest," he said. "We can't keep running ourselves ragged. Danger isn't always in front of us. It's also an exhaustion and mistakes." She nodded, finally letting herself be guided. She had spent so long relying only on herself, but she realized that survival sometimes required trust. And in this man, she had found someone worthy of that trust. As they rested, she allowed herself to speak about her fears, something she had not done in days. I thought I would never see my home again," she admitted quietly. "I thought I would die alone, with no one to help me." The cowboy listened without interruption. When she finished, he said softly, "You are stronger than you think."
You survived the attack. You have kept up through this journey.
Breath. "And now you're learning to trust. That takes strength too." His words struck her deeply. She had always believed that strength meant fighting alone, enduring alone, and carrying burdens by herself. But now she understood that courage could also mean trusting another person, allowing them to stand with you instead of against you. For the first time, she felt a bond forming, quiet but undeniable, between herself and the man who had saved her life twice in as many days. The next morning, they resumed their journey. The sun was bright, and the path led them into a valley filled with scattered trees and hidden streams. The young woman noticed small signs of wildlife, rabbit tracks in the soil, birds nesting in the branches, and felt a strange sense of calm. Life continued around them, indifferent to the dangers they faced, and in that observation she found perspective. Survival was not just about fleeing from danger. It was about noticing the small, enduring things that gave life meaning. As they walked, she began to ask questions about the cowboy's life. "Where do you come from?" she asked cautiously. He smiled faintly, not out of humor, but from a quiet contentment in sharing a story. "I grew up in these lands," he said. "I learned how to ride, to hunt, to read the land. I've had a few adventures, some more dangerous than others, but I always try to do right by people who need help."
She considered his words, noticing the honesty in them.
He did not boast. He did not claim glory. He simply lived his life with a sense of responsibility and purpose. She realized that this was rare, even in her own community. Courage, she began to understand, was not just in action, but in consistency. Showing up, doing what was right, and standing by those who depended on you. They camped that night in a sheltered area, with the cowboy preparing a small fire and gathering water. The young woman sat nearby, feeling the ache in her muscles, but also a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had survived not only the physical journey, but the emotional turbulence that came with fear, uncertainty, and reliance on another human being. She was changing, slowly, learning to let go of some of her wariness while keeping the alertness that had kept her alive. As the night deepened, the cowboy shared more about the land, teaching her to recognize animal tracks, signs of weather changes, and ways to find hidden water sources. She listened intently, absorbing every word. For the first time, she felt a sense of mastery over her circumstances, a feeling that the journey was not just about fleeing danger, but about learning to navigate the world with skill and awareness. In the quiet moments around the fire, she also noticed something else. The cowboy's eyes. They were steady, observant, and kind. They seemed to see not just her body, but her spirit. There was no judgment in his gaze, no impatience, only a quiet acknowledgement of her courage, her pain, and her growing resilience. She felt a warmth in her chest, a mixture of respect, admiration, and something she could not yet name. Over the following days, their journey continued through more difficult terrain. They crossed steep ridges, navigated dry riverbeds, and skirted areas where hostile strangers could appear at any moment. Each obstacle tested their coordination, their patience, and their mutual reliance. Yet, with every challenge, the young woman found her trust in the cowboy growing stronger. She began to anticipate his actions, to learn from his instincts, and to understand the balance between caution and courage. During one particularly harsh stretch, a sudden rainstorm struck. The desert had a way of turning from calm to chaotic in moments, and the young woman found herself struggling to keep her footing on slippery rocks. The cowboy immediately guided her, offering his hand and steadying her as they moved through the storm. Water soaked her clothes, and the chill of the wind cut through her, but she did not falter. For the first time, she realized that danger was not just about survival. It was also about learning to endure, to persevere, and to trust the one standing beside you. When the storm finally passed, they found shelter under a large rock overhang. The young woman shivered, but the cowboy tended to her with care, offering warmth and reassurance. She allowed herself to rest against him, letting go of some of the tension she had carried for days. The fear had not disappeared, but it had shifted. Breath. Now it was tempered by trust, by companionship, and by the recognition that she was not alone in facing the world. That night, as she lay close to the fire, the young woman reflected on the journey so far. She had expected death when the raiders attacked her village, yet she had been saved not once, but repeatedly. She had learned to navigate the wilderness, to rely on another, and to see strength not only in herself but in the cowboy who had chosen to stand with her. Slowly, she felt a sense of hope growing within her, a belief that life could continue, even after the deepest fear. The bond between them was quiet, but undeniable. It was built not on words or declarations, but on shared experiences, mutual respect, and the understanding that survival required both courage and trust. She realized that the cowboy had become more than a protector. He had become a companion, someone who saw her as a person of strength and value. And in that realization, she felt the first stirrings of something more, an awareness that life, even in its harshest forms, could still hold moments of care, respect, and perhaps, eventually, love. As the stars emerged above the desert, sparkling in the endless sky, she closed her eyes with a sense of gratitude. She had survived another day. She had learned lessons about trust, courage, and endurance, and she had begun to understand that her life, once defined by fear and captivity, was slowly opening to new possibilities. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in days, she felt ready to face whatever came next, with the cowboy by her side, and with the quiet knowledge that she was stronger than she had ever imagined.
The journey had been long and challenging.
The young woman had endured danger, harsh weather, and exhaustion, yet she had grown stronger with every step. She had learned to rely on the cowboy, to anticipate the obstacles of the wilderness, and to trust in someone beyond herself. The bond between them had deepened quietly, formed in moments of survival, shared meals, and the silent understanding that each was responsible for the other's safety. As they descended from a rocky ridge into a wide valley, the landscape changed. The desert gave way to soft grasslands dotted with wild flowers and small clusters of trees. The air was warmer, carrying the sweet scent of blossoms and the distant sound of running water. For the first time in weeks, the young woman felt a sense of peace. She looked around, taking in the beauty of the land and feeling the ache in her muscles lessen with the gentleness of the valley. The cowboy guided her toward a small ranch that he said belonged to a trusted friend. It was a place where they could rest, recover, and plan the next steps of their journey. As they approached, she saw a few simple buildings, a wooden fence enclosing a small pasture, and a handful of animals grazing peacefully. The sight of normal life, quiet, stable, and safe, stirred a mixture of relief and hope within her. Great. She realized how much she had longed for safety, for a life without constant fear. The cowboy dismounted and held out his hand to help her down from her horse. "Or stay here for a while," he said gently. "You need rest, and it's time to regain your strength." She hesitated for a moment, looking at him with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. She had come so far, survived so much, and yet she still carried the memories of fear and loss. But there was something in his calm, steady gaze that reassured her. Slowly, she took his hand, allowing him to guide her down. Inside the main building, she was shown a small room with a bed, clean linens, and a window that looked out onto the fields. It was simple, but it felt like a palace compared to the chaos of the past days. She sat on the edge of the bed, letting the comfort wash over her. For the first time in a long while, she felt the possibility of safety, of a future that was not dominated by fear. Over the next few days, the cowboy stayed by her side, helping her recover. He taught her how to tend to small injuries, how to care for the animals, and how to move safely through the land around the ranch. Each lesson was patient and deliberate, giving her confidence in her own abilities while reinforcing the bond between them. She began to realize that he was not just a protector. He was a teacher, a companion, and a guide. One afternoon, as they worked together in the small garden behind the house, the young woman paused and looked at him.
I never imagined life could be like this, she said softly.
After everything, after the attack, after the fear, I thought I would always live with danger and worry. The cowboy wiped his hands on his trousers and looked at her. Life is full of challenges, he said. But it's also full of chances to grow, to trust, and to find moments of peace. You've survived more than anyone could ask of you, and now you have a choice, to continue surviving or to start living. She considered his words, the simplicity and truth in them. She had spent so long in fear that she had forgotten the possibility of joy, of companionship, of hope. Now with him, she began to understand that life could hold more than danger. It could hold care, respect, and even love. As the days turned into weeks, the young woman grew stronger, more confident, and more at ease with her surroundings. She learned the rhythms of the ranch, from feeding the animals to maintaining the fences, and she found satisfaction in her accomplishments. The cowboy watched her with quiet pride, never imposing, always supporting, allowing her to take ownership of her life again. One evening, as the sun set over the valley, painting the sky with shades of gold and crimson, they sat together on the porch of the main house. The young woman felt a sense of contentment she had not known since her childhood in the village. She glanced at the cowboy who was looking out over the fields, his expression calm and thoughtful. She began hesitantly, unsure how to put her thoughts into words. Brace, I never expected to find safety. Someone I could trust completely. Pet. He turned to her, meeting her eyes with a steady gaze. Trust is earned, he said quietly. And you've earned mine. You've shown courage, resilience, and strength. You deserve safety, respect, and someone who sees your value.
Her chest warmed with emotion.
For so long she had feared being powerless, being alone, and being used or harmed. Now she realized that she was seen, not just as someone who needed saving, but as someone worthy of care, respect, and partnership. The realization was overwhelming yet freeing. In the following days, their bond continued to deepen. They shared meals, stories, and quiet moments of companionship. She learned about his life, his experiences, and the values that guided him. He learned about her past, her family, and the traditions of her people. In these exchanges, a mutual understanding and respect grew, forming the foundation of a connection that went beyond survival. Breaths. One morning, as they tended to the animals, the young woman noticed how naturally their movements synchronized. She could anticipate his actions, and he hers. It was as if the long journey they had endured together had not only strengthened her body and spirit, but also created a silent, unspoken bond between them. She realized that she trusted him completely, not just to protect her, but to respect her, to listen to her, and to stand beside her as an equal. The cowboy, too, recognized the change. Best, he had seen her fear turn into courage, her wariness turn into trust, and her strength emerge in ways that impressed him deeply. He admired her resilience, her intelligence, and her unwavering spirit. He realized that he no longer saw her merely as someone to protect, but as someone he wanted by his side in life, as a partner and companion. One evening, under the same golden sunset, he took a step that would change their lives forever. He spoke softly, yet with certainty. I've watched you grow stronger, face every challenge, and reclaim your life. I want you to know something. I care for you, not just for your strength, but for who you are. Day, I want you to stay with me, not as someone who needs saving, but as someone I respect and value. The young woman's heart raced. She had anticipated danger, struggle, and fear for so long that the possibility of love and partnership seemed almost unimaginable. Yet looking into his eyes, she saw nothing but honesty, respect, and genuine care. She felt the weight of her past lift slightly, replaced by the hope of a life she had never thought possible. She began, her voice trembling. I don't know what to say. I never imagined someone could see me like that after everything I've been through.
He reached for her hand, holding it gently. Then say you'll try, he said.
Say you'll trust me and we'll figure out the rest together. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of fear. They were tears of relief, gratitude, and newfound hope. She nodded, allowing herself to be vulnerable for the first time in years. I'll stay, she whispered. I'll stay with you.
The days that followed were filled with quiet joy and the simple routines of life together.
They worked on the ranch, shared meals, and learned to move as a team. She felt the freedom of safety, the comfort of trust, and the warmth of companionship. The cowboy's presence was steady and unwavering, and she discovered that trust, once given, could create a bond stronger than fear.
Over time, the young woman fully embraced her new life.
She learned to ride confidently, tend to the animals, and manage the land with skill. The cowboy supported her every step of the way, never imposing, always encouraging, and respecting her independence. In this partnership, they found balance. She brought strength, courage, and resilience, while he brought guidance, protection, and care. Together, they created a life that was safe, fulfilling, and full of quiet happiness. Finally, one clear morning, the cowboy spoke again, his voice calm but filled with warmth. I want to make this official, he said. I want you to be my wife, not because you need saving, but because I want to share my life with you. Will you? The young woman looked at him, her heart full of emotion. Breaths. She thought of the journey they had endured, the dangers they had faced, and the trust and care they had built. She realized that this life, once unimaginable, was now her reality, and that she had chosen to embrace it fully.
With a soft smile, she replied, "Yes, I will."
The cowboy took her hand, holding it firmly, and she felt the depth of commitment and respect in his gesture. They had come so far, from fear and captivity to trust, partnership, and love. The world was still vast and unpredictable, but together they had found safety, belonging, and hope. As they stood together looking out over the valley, the young woman felt a sense of peace she had never known. She had survived unimaginable fear, endured a perilous journey, and learned to trust and love again. The cowboy had not just saved her life, he had shown her that life could be lived fully, with courage, respect. And in that moment she realized that she was no longer a captive of fear. She was free, strong, and ready to embrace a new future, one built on trust, love, and shared strength.